What's up, guys? This is Taco from DFSArmy.com, and I'm here today with a basic training video for the 2025 season. What a great sport to start right after NFL comes to an end. Keeps that Sunday flame rolling for daily fantasy sports. And if you're new to the sport or just coming in from NFL, don't really know all the basics, that's what this video is here for. Just breaking down the fundamentals of this sport. We've got fantasy points, how they're scored between the two sites, starting position, how that matters, qualifying, what the importance of that, different track types that we'll be going to throughout the course of the year, and the different race packages that we'll be using in the different series. Practice data, how to look at that, analyze that, including the lap by lap data that we have on the research station available to you. The odds, the props, and how to use them effectively for fantasy purposes. And then the Domination Station lineup optimizer and how to set it up with the Dominator rules. And just a quick basic guide on how to get it going each week. So you can come to this video if you ever find yourself confused. Should break it down for you pretty quickly. So starting with DraftKings, the main site that most people play this sport on. The fantasy point scoring algorithm pretty much simply goes like this. You're going to take 41 points and you're going to subtract their finish. So a win gets you 40, second gets you 39, etc. You get 2 extra points if you win, 1 extra point if you come in the top 10, 1 for the top 20, 1 for the top 30, and then 1 point per place differential. So that's if you start 5th and you finish 4th, that's 1 point. Congrats. If you start 1st and you finished 40th, that's minus 39 points, so that's pretty bad. 0.25 points per laps led and 0.45 points per fast lap. And that doesn't sound like a lot of points, but at some of the tracks we have up to 500 laps. That really adds up over time. For FanDuel, it's similar with the finishing position scoring, 41 minus their finish, but a +2 winner's bonus, but no top 10, 20, or 30 bonus, and only 0.5 points per place differential, so place differential scoring is halved. And then the key things that make this different: no points for fast laps, 0.1 points per laps completed, and 0.1 points per lead lap. So less points per lead lap, but overall there are less points going out there because there are no fast laps counted, and the 0.1 points per laps completed gives everyone a pretty big floor, especially at the tracks with a whole bunch of laps on it. And we'll kind of break down how the scoring varies between the two sites at the different track types here in a little bit. So the track types that we're going to be looking at throughout the course of the season, your main one's going to be the 1.5 mile intermediate tracks. Then there are a few large oval tracks that are 2 or 2.5 miles. They're also in the same package as the intermediate ones for the most part. You got your short tracks, the short and flat tracks, which will mostly be run on, they'll all be run on the short track package. The short and steep tracks, which last year in the Cup Series they started running those in the intermediate package, but there are a handful of those, and there's even a new one in the Truck Series we'll talk about here in a bit. Road courses, also Rovals, which are like the Charlotte Roval, which is half of the oval race and then half of the road course. And then new addition to NASCAR, the street courses. Chicago was just added a few years ago, but we're getting a new street course this year. Superspeedways, Daytona, Talladega, and now Atlanta. The big fast pack racing that is super popular with the fans. And we'll also need to go over the different race packages and how they matter. We'll go through that as we go through the different types of tracks here, starting with the intermediate tracks. So you've got your basic tracks: Texas, Charlotte, Homestead, Las Vegas, Kansas. Those are your 1.5 mile tracks, the bread and butter of NASCAR. They're going to be in the intermediate package, along with the larger ovals and some of the smaller, steeper tracks. And then you've got your exceptions to the rule here, kind of, that are not 1.5 miles, but they're pretty close, and they ran the intermediate package. You got Gateway, which are pretty flat, 1.25 mile. Darlington, which is a really steep 1.3 mile. And then Nashville, which is only 14 degrees, but kind of runs like a super speedway a little bit. It's very unique. That's a 1.3 miler. Then we've got the large ovals, which are just really big. You got Pocono, Michigan, Indianapolis. I miss you, Auto Club. I miss you every year. Bring back Auto Club. Your short and flat tracks. So this is where the championship race is going to be ran at Phoenix. This will be in the short track package in Cup. You got Phoenix, New Hampshire, Richmond. Those are the main short flat tracks. You got Martinsville, which is the track that has 500 laps on it with very low banking. And very similar to Bristol there, we get some really unique scoring just because of the vast number of laps. And then we've got Iowa, which is added last year. North Wilkesboro, which we've just started going to recently for the All-Star race, and we'll still be going there for the All-Star race. And then this week we're going to a brand new track, Bowman Gray, for the Clash. It's going to be replacing the LA Coliseum. It's a 1/4 miler with no banking. That should be fun. And then the Lucas Oil Indianapolis Raceway Park, right there next to Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It's in the truck series only. That's a really fun little short track. The short steep tracks, that's Dover, Bristol, Darlington, and Rockingham, which is going to be a new addition to this year for the trucks and the Xfinity. They're going to be there an Easter weekend, so we're going to actually get some sort of racing every single week this year, which is pretty cool. We'll still get Easter off, but we will be going to Rockingham that Friday and Saturday. And these, as of last year, they started using the intermediate package in Cup for these races. Dover, Bristol, Darlington. They're much higher banking, so they're considerably faster than the other short tracks. And the road courses, these are the ones that turn left and right, of course. You got Watkins Glen, Sonoma, Road America, Circuit of the Americas, the Indianapolis Grand Prix. I don't think we go there anymore. The Charlotte Roval, the Daytona Road Course. We also don't go there anymore. And Portland, which we go to in the Xfinity Series. And in addition to these road courses, we've got the street courses. So a couple years ago, we added the Chicago Street Course. We saw Shane Van Gisberger come in and just absolutely smash there. And we'll be going there for a third time this year. But in addition to that, we've got a new one at Mexico City. So should be really cool. The Superspeedways, these are the super large drafting tracks or you pretty much never need to use the brake. And they're pretty much always a big crash at these. And usually want to stack guys starting from the rear. Daytona, Talladega, Atlanta, and yeah, it requires a completely different strategy than what we're used to. Stacking guys from the back, leaving salary on the table. It's going to be super important to craft those uniquely, and that's what the big race is going to be on, Daytona. So we'll talk in a second here about how to attack those super speedways generally, but we're going to start by looking at intermediate tracks. Again, the bread and butter of NASCAR. These are the most standard tracks, and they have a pretty standard scoring spread. So on DraftKings, you'll see guys starting in the top 5. Usually if you qualify in the top 5, you've got some speed from practice, and you're going to be able to lead a lot of this race. It's not as extreme of a advantage as it would be at like a short track where you can rack up the laps easier, but typically if you qualify in the top 5 or so, your car has some speed, and at intermediate tracks, just the speed you show in practice is really important. FanDuel, you see there's more of, there's a bit more of an even spread between the guys starting in the front and the back, but that advantage is still there for the guys who are in the front. It's just not nearly as extreme as it is on DraftKings, and you're going to kind of notice this a lot as you go through the different track types. It's because of that 0.1 laps per laps completed. The intermediate tracks, usually in Cup, they're about 267 laps, varying a bit for places like Darlington or Gateway that aren't exactly a mile and a half, but usually they're 267 with some exceptions. You've got like the the super long Coke 600 at Charlotte, which is like 400 laps, and you got to play that kind of differently. But this is pretty cookie cutter. This is like the standard DFS NASCAR sort of race that we're going to, and we've seen the most elite cars not be quite as elite as we've seen in years past with this new car. So we've seen a lot more parity from the teams in the mid tier to the even slightly outside the mid tier. Those guys have been able to compete a little bit. And so we're going to the short tracks now, and this is where we see a noticeable difference between DraftKings and FanDuel. On DraftKings, it's just guys starting up front that absolutely crush. They're hitting 50 fantasy points like half of the time, and the guys starting in the rear almost never hit 50 fantasy points. It's a pretty huge difference, but you can see on FanDuel the guys starting the top 5 almost always hit 50 fantasy points because all you got to do is just complete some laps, and the guys starting like outside of the top 30 also are pretty much almost guaranteed to get 50. So FanDuel, you got to attack it very differently. If you have one car that gets knocked out or sent to the garage for any reason, you're toast. So you kind of want to pick your safe race finishers and look at DNF stats over there. It's like really important. But of course, you've always got to you've always got to nail the top finishers and the guys who lead laps specifically. For DraftKings, the fast laps are going to come in really big here. So the short tracks, fast laps, absolutely essential. Usually they're going to go to the guys leading the race, but they will vary from race to race. And at Superspeedways, you see it's just a completely different story. DraftKings and FanDuel, you'll see that guys starting in the rear average significantly more fantasy points, and starting in the top 5 averages you 12 fantasy points on DraftKings. As we're starting in the back 5, averages 38.8. It's absolutely massive. It's a little bit less extreme at Atlanta, where sometimes you can get those guys starting in the top 10 that provide some value, but Daytona, Talladega, you absolutely just want to stack from the back. The data here clearly shows that. You really don't want to be messing too much with guys starting in the top 20, and that goes for FanDuel as well. The trend is pretty consistent there. It's just less of an extreme advantage to the guys in the very, very back over there on FanDuel. It's really more about finishing the race there. So, practice data. We'll have this available every week right after practice finishes. We'll have every lap that's available. The lap times will be spread out there. We'll have the different averages, like 5, 10, 15, 20 lap averages as they're available. Like the 5 best, the 10 best, 15 best, 20 best lap averages that can be very important, especially at the shorter tracks where we really rack up the laps. It's pretty crucial to have that. And some of these places won't really matter, like at super speedway races. It's completely useless to look at the practice data. Really don't care about that. Sometimes at shorter tracks, there will be groups like Group A, Group B. I think there are 3 groups at the Bowman Gray race coming up because it's such a small track. And sometimes there is a group split. I will let you guys know on the Discord if there's a significant split, but you can usually just tell because I'll have them sorted on there by their group, and you can usually see which group had a big advantage. So you don't just want to look at the practice charts and go, oh, these guys were on the top of the practice board. That's who you want to use. Not necessarily. If almost everyone at the top of the practice board is in Group A, you've got to consider the Group B, like who was in the top of Group B. Those guys are probably also fast too, even though they're like coming up as like 10th or 11th best overall. Because some tracks just change rapidly based on weather, based on just rubber getting down on the track, adding grip, really just cloud coverage sometimes makes a big difference there. So be sure to pay attention to that each week. Practice time is pretty useful on the ovals and the road courses, especially the shorter ones. Like I said, we get some more meaningful data, and there's some tracks where long run speed is super important. Other places like road courses, you really want to look at just what was their best lap time, especially with the limited amount of data there, since some of those can get up to 4 miles in length, and you might get like 5 laps of practice in. So that's going to be one of the first things you look at on a week-to-week basis. Odds and props. So obviously you got the winning odds, the top 5 and 10 odds. Those are going to be updated constantly. Using DraftKings Sportsbook as the primary source just for consistency from week to week. And I will have the calculated implied odds on there. So that is the implied percent chance that they win or hit top 5, hit top 10 with the rake automatically adjusted in there. So it's all proportional to each other. So those are really nice to look at if you're looking for, you know, guys that can get a win, top 5, top 10, etc. And you've got your special props that are available on Sunday. Always check the Discord for these, but also do your own research and be sure to be F5ing places like Bovada, Bet365 on Sunday, because you can get some really nice props. Like expected cautions is really huge. Oftentimes I think most weeks there will be a prop for the number of cautions expected in a race, which is really nice. Stage props, it's really nice for early dominators to see who's favored to win stage 1, stage 2. Those have been a little less consistent. You're going to get those more on the more marquee races, the bigger races of the year, but it's nice whenever those are posted. And then you've got prize picks and underdog props, and to a lesser extent, pick 6 props. And those usually come out late Saturday, early Sunday for the Cup Series. And they can be nice. They can be a little bit misleading. They usually only put out a couple of props for fast laps and lead laps. Usually the guys that are expected to dominate the race, but they are worth looking at. Overall lineup construction. So your dominators are guys that are expected to lead laps and get fast laps. That's just the general term for them, dominators. Typically the more laps there are, the more dominators that you want. So at a 500 lap Martinsville race, dominators are going to be so much more important than guys starting in the back, as where if you're at a place like a road course, like Road America or something, where you've got like 60 to 80 laps to work with, those guys starting up front, while they will probably finish really well because of how road courses are, they don't have the potential as the guys in the rear. Like a really good example would be like at the Daytona duels, right, where there's only a handful of laps. The guys starting in the rear are obviously going to be incredibly popular because, you know, going from like 23rd to like 5th is going to score so much more than starting first and like finishing like 3rd or something with a handful of lead laps. It's not really going to do a whole lot for you. Place differential plays on a week-to-week basis, they will project high on average, but you got to remember that unless it's a super speedway or a race with minimal laps, that you cannot forget about the dominators. You're going to need at least 1 or 2 at pretty much every track. Even at like road courses, there's usually always a guy starting up front who's going to finish the race because the fast cars usually qualify up front. The race winner is almost always valuable. So don't forget about those guys. If you're just going off of raw median projections, you know, unless it's a super speedway, you do not want to just take guys from the back, the place differential plays. You'll usually want one guy who's going to lead early on. So guys starting in like the top 5 typically. If you can get those stage props, that's really nice. You're going to want one of the guys who's highly expected to lead either stage 1 or stage 2. But that can change. Sometimes a guy is like the fastest in the field and he's starting from the rear. And if he can make his way up through, especially if it's like the lower series, like the truck series, if he can make his way quickly up there and lead the race, you may not need someone starting in the top 5. But typically, you're almost always going to need someone starting in the top 5, unless it's like a super speedway or something like that. The recommended number of dominators will be available in the notes from week to week. So me and Brady both do a cheat sheet. Just look at the top of my cheat sheet and you will see a bunch of handy notes, including the expected carnage levels, the number of dominators recommended to run in the domination station, lineup optimizer, along with just some general notes week to week. So that's a very important tool. Don't forget to look at the notes. Those will always be updated Sunday morning. for the DS or Domination Station optimization, again, make sure to check the notes for the Dominator rules that are recommended. Typically, it will change sometimes, but for the most part, if we're at an intermediate 1.5 mile track, the rule at least one Dom is pretty much always going to work. At a lot of short tracks, you can use at least 2, but it really depends on qualifying and the number of laps and which series you're in, but at least 2 can work at the tracks with 400, 500 laps. And at Superspeedways, there are many ways you can set it up. Sometimes you don't want any. Typically, like a good safe rule is at most 2 or at most 1 if you're being a bit more aggressive, and set the Dominators to like anyone in the top 15, top 20. That's a good way to attack that, because that's just what's worked. And it's recommended to run on tournament mode. The difference between optimal mode and tournament mode is after a lineup has been ran, it's going to randomize, or it's going to not randomize, but it's going to consider the total exposure in your pool. As where if you run the optimal mode, it's just going to take best lineup number 1, best lineup number 2, best lineup number 3. If you want a really good mix and not run a lot of the same guys with each other over and over, it's highly recommended to run the DS on tournament mode. Randomization is pretty important if you're making a mass amount of lineups. Again, it helps keep the same guys from being used together over and over. Usually set that between 10 and 25%. And I will let you guys know in the notes which percentage I am recommending. And the shitter rule. So I will usually post this, especially when people ask, but the shitter rule is basically this. So there's a group setting in the DS where you can just select drivers to be in a group and then make special rules for them. I like to take the absolute worst plays, the really shitty plays, not ones that you just don't want any of. Those you just uncheck, you unfriend them. But the shitty plays who are extremely contrarian, like for GPPs, I like to put them all in a pool, and I call it the shitter rule. And I do at most 1, so that it only takes 1 of the shitters in each lineup. It's a great way to keep those guys who you may have like a minimum percentage put on, because you still want to play them because they're very contrarian, very cool. It's going to only use 1 of them in each lineup. It keeps the very bottom lineups in your output from being just loaded up with those guys to hit the minimum percentage. Highly recommend you do that. But yeah, be creative and kind of express yourself with the rules. Just don't over constrain and set too many rules, or else you're going to get some really wonky lineups. Typically, if you just kind of follow what I've explained so far, set some minimums on some guys that may not pop up, use a shitter rule, set a maximum exposure, just varying on the different race. Maximum exposure of like 50% with like maybe some exceptions of guys you really want to go in on. That's typically going to be good, but my favorite thing to do is just run it. Look at the pool you're getting, make some adjustments, run it, do it over and over again until you're really happy with what it spits out. Usually it takes me about 5 to 10 runs to get to where I'm enjoying it, but the more you run it, the more it's going to look pretty good. So now, cash games versus GPPs or tournaments. So for cash games, we will mark the cash safe players in the notes. You could just go off of that. You could just go off of just who the highest projected players are typically, but really you want to prioritize safety over everything else in cash games. Usually it's just going to be the chalkiest or the highest projected owned players. That's usually going to be pretty good chalk. You do not need to be unique in cash games. You just need to be safe. So especially in those high dollar tourneys, you just want to pick the chalk, honestly. Safe place differential plays. Place differential is going to matter more in cash games than in GPPs. And the heavily favored guys, especially in the Trucks and Xfinity series, going to be huge. Those heavily favored guys are going to be 70, 80% owned all the time. If someone's going to be 70, 80, 90% owned in cash, you do not want to not have them. And also safe and consistent drivers with high laps completed percentage, which you can find on the research station, and a good lead lap finish rate. especially on FanDuel. And then your GPP tournament plays. They're risky plays, preferably low-owned plays that have high upside. And more drivers now in this next-gen car have high upside than before. Those lower teams have so much more upside than they have in previous seasons, and you need to realize that as we move on through another season in this car. Unconventional dominators that might project super low, so this is where the shitter rule comes in. Every now and again you get that weird Chase Briscoe type guy starting like in second or whatever, where they're an awful play, project horribly, but if they just so happen to get out in front, lead a bunch of laps. We've seen so many slates decided by guys like that just randomly lead a whole bunch of laps at like 5% ownership. That's why we set minimum percentages on those guys. But again, just want to make sure that you're not going too crazy with them and not playing them with other ridiculous plays. Drivers sent to the rear. So a lot of times drivers will be sent to the rear, not scored from the rear for adjustments like replacing different parts in their car or penalties. Those guys usually, when they're sent to the back, we see their ownership tank. Those guys could be good tournament plays still, especially at tracks where, usually just tracks that aren't short tracks where you can find your way up to the front pretty quickly. Yeah, just out of the ordinary sort of plays. Those are going to be the ones that are better for tournaments and obviously not very safe for cash. Plays that are unfriendly for optimizers, so the ones that project poorly, again, those can be really good in single entry or in 3-max where people really don't think to play those kind of guys. And then GPP lineups, you don't have to totally avoid the chalk. You don't have to be completely ridiculous. As long as you have like 1 or 2 really low-owned plays, you are going to be good. So that pretty much does it here. Just remember, don't bet what you can't afford to lose. This is entertainment. We're just having fun here. We're having a good time. We're here playing NASCAR DFS just to enjoy ourselves and wait for the next NFL season to come. So it's really important not to look at your DraftKings app. I like to close the DraftKings app throughout the whole race, because if you're winning money in the beginning, usually that's a bad sign. And ultimately, there are so many cautions at the very end of races and overtimes that you really don't know how much money you're going to win until the final lap is done. And even when the final lap is done, there's still stat adjustments afterwards. So I like to wait until I get paid out to see how much I win, honestly, because sweating that could be awful. There's nothing worse than seeing that you've won a bunch of money or something and there's a stat adjustment or just a last second crash that just ruins it all. It usually doesn't happen the other way around. So don't bother checking them. They don't really matter. It's not like NBA where you can track, okay, my guys are doing well, my guys are doing poorly. Unless your guy is leading the entire race and has so many dominator points that he could just go to the garage and still be optimal. Unless that's your guy, anything could happen. So in NASCAR, you want to be bold with your plays. You don't just want to play close to what the projected ownership is. You're not going to win anything that way. And, don't come in with too many preconceived biases, especially early in the season, because we don't really know what these cars are going to do, and there's more parity now. So feel free to just get a little different. And personally, I would recommend if you like a driver, just play them more. I really don't like fading my favorite guys just for the hell of it. Unless they're just really bad. I have to root against Chase Elliott all the time. But trust me, if Bill Elliott was racing these races, I would be all on him every week. And honestly, if you just have your guy that you just play every week, you're going to hit him eventually. It could be a good way just to get different. And remember, if you win 10K or more, send us a screenshot in the Discord and we will get you a free swag bag. And you'll be on the wall of winners. Sounds pretty good, eh? And if you're not a member, at dfsarmy.com. Pull up today, dfsarmy.com. NASCAR season getting underway. I'm pretty sure we've got a promo out for a reduced price for the NASCAR only subscription. Use promo code TACO. Get you that lifetime 10% off. And that'll do it. Thank you guys, and let's have an awesome 2025 season. See ya.